Hello, this is UK Live TV, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev. And our guest today is Tom Kupper. He is a famous Austrian military expert specializing in military aviation. He is author of many books and articles about wars in different parts of the world. And as well, he is author of books about the Russia's war in Ukraine. Tom, hello. Thank you very much to be with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Very nice to be with you.
Thank you. Tom, my congratulations. As I understand, you have a second volume of your book about the Russians' war in Ukraine. And as you write, this book, just let me quote it you. Please mind that books aren't written over the night. What does it mean?
Well, we have started working on this series already in 2021. And initial intention was to ready 3 or 4 volumes covering, actually 4 volumes, covering separatist forces, Donetsk and Luhansk, and then covering Ukrainian forces from the period 2014 until 2021-22. And then to cover the war of 2014-2015. That was the initial plan. And then shortly before the volume 1 was published last year, Russia re-invaded Ukraine. And of course, we had to change that plan. So we have inserted this volume 2 now into this series. And this is covering the status of Ukrainian and Russian armed forces as of February last year, their planning, capabilities, intentions, and then the most important combat operations of the first 2 weeks of the war.
About the very beginning of this large...
Very beginning, yes. The invasion, or let's say this way, the advance on Kiev, the advances on Melitopol, on Kherson, on Mykolaiv, on the Battle of Voznesensk, and the start of the siege of Mariupol. Actually, by the time the book is ending, Mariupol was not yet firmly besieged, so it is not discussed that much. That is going to be covered in one of future volumes. And this is, when you ask me why the books, one cannot write a book over the night, because let's say, for example, you have a source who is describing the Russian advance on Melitopol and how comes they have managed to capture that city 130 kilometers from their starting point in a matter of something like 48 hours, perhaps 60 hours. But you don't know the other part of the story. Perhaps it takes months. It very often takes months, sometimes even years, to find a source who can tell you the rest of the story. For example, that there was 128 mountain assault brigade, and that this was in the middle of being mobilized, and that its officers and troops were doing their utmost to save the city, but had no other option but to withdraw until they ended in Hulaipole area a few days later. So it's like that, you constantly. Historic research never ends. You always learn something new. You always find new sources, learn something new, and then cross-check that, and then go on and so on.
Many Ukrainians read your detailed analysis of war, and thank you very much for that. And I prepare some special question for you. And my first question is that after the 9 years of war, after a year of big war, Ukraine survived, despite the prediction of many respected intelligence and politicians. Why it's happened? What do you think?
Because of Ukrainian people. Just as simple as that. Ukrainians with whom I'm communicating almost daily, meanwhile, are people who are determined, who have, as absurd as it might sound, who have experienced even worse than this war, who went through tragedies in their families, who went to economic crisis, who went to political turbulences, who went to Maidan, who were facing, odds, and still came out, survived, and have families, and they are around, and without this will of the people, the defense of the entire country would have been absolutely impossible. And if there were failures, like there were failures, and not just few, they were always on the top, always between the decision makers or the people who under whatever circumstances have the decision makers in their hand, who are able to exercise some sort of control over the decision makers. But everyday simple Ukrainian people, they are determined to get their freedom, whatever it takes. And this is why Ukraine is still standing, so to say. And not only standing, but you have destroyed the Russian army. This is no joke. This is really a serious success. And this is why, because of the people of Ukraine, not because of any other reason. And as I'm sure you know, if nothing else, talk with your warriors at the front lines. They are ready to fight, if necessary, against Russian tanks with their bare hands, if they don't get any kind of ammunition. And this is what is saving Ukraine every single day since 9 years, if not longer.
Tom, many things change during this year. Ukrainian army, Russian army. What changes are more important and will determine the further course of the war?
What changes? It is less in the changes. It's more in I think so, at least, for kind of correcting you now. I'm not trying to correct you, but I'm trying to organize my thoughts. And in this regards, to me, it appears that it's more or less specific series of realizations. First, the realization that whatever the political and military leadership of the country is going to do in Ukraine, whatever they decide, Ukrainians are going to fight. Period. Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom. And no matter what their politicians, what your political leadership is doing, no matter even what kind of mistakes is your military leadership doing, no matter, regardless of treason, in certain cases, you have had lots of people who have turned out to be turncoats, Russian agents. It doesn't matter. Ukrainians fight, We see this also an example of many of battles, starting from northwestern Kiev back in March last year, and the 72nd Mechanized said, okay, we are standing here, we're not going to let them get through to Kiev. And they're fighting like crazy for 3 weeks, and no matter what the Russians were throwing at them, what the Russians were shooting at them, they were just fighting and fighting and fighting, regardless of casualties, regardless how many people were driven almost crazy with all they have seen and experienced. They kept on fighting, and they're still fighting. So it is foremost the realization that all the possible intelligence assessments, no matter how well supported, they cannot assess the will of the people to fight. On the other side, not only Western intelligence assessments, but also Russian intelligence assessments, where that the mass of Ukrainians would not fight, or would even join the Russians and greet them as some kind of liberators and so on. Again, there is another realization. Even Putin had to admit now that Ukrainians are willing to fight him and fight whomever he sends over to Ukraine, over the border, and to attack Ukraine. And even he now has to admit that he has no solutions actually to the situation. Because yes, he has nukes, and that's all. That is all that is left to him. He can send, another 150,000 troops every 6 months into Ukraine. and 6 months later another 100, 150 troops. And if he knows whatever he sends into Ukraine is going to be destroyed, he's going to cause losses to Ukraine, he's going to cause pain and terror, but Ukrainians are going to keep on fighting. So now he is hoping, this is another realization, he's hoping, well, okay, let's try to survive this for the next 2 to 4 years until the next elections, whether in the United States or somewhere else, but perhaps then we are going to manage something. This is, these are the changes, so to say, perceptions and the way the people of Ukraine see themselves, I hope, and the West sees Ukraine, the way Russia sees Ukraine now. Of course, in the public it's different, but at the top it's already different. At the top in Russia, there's already a realization, this is not going to work that way we have expected.
Tom, if you say about the perception, I think it is very interesting fact that before the big invasion, Russia, everybody knows that Russia is the second big army in the world. And everybody say, oh, it is impossible to struggle with the Russian army. What's happened with Russia, with the Russian army?
Perception. It is, you are right that there was a public perception of Russia as the second biggest, or most powerful military force on this world. For people like me, many of things that have happened to the Russians are no surprise at all, because we have a different perception. For example, I have studied Russian military operations in Syria for years, and really it helped for first-hand sources on the side of Assadists and on the side of the insurgency, and on the side of the Turkish armed forces. So I was able to cross-check what do they report. And it was obvious already then, and you can read that in one of my earlier books about the Russian military intervention in Syria, that they cannot match the West, that there are no second military power in the world, that plenty of what they are claiming about their armament are lies, that, for example, the Air Force has no precision-guided ammunition, that their pilots are poorly trained, that their ground troops are ill-supported, and so on and so on. So there are very big differences, of course, in the way people are perceiving this. Some, wider public is dependent on the media. The world in which I'm moving is very small group of people, easy to oversee, so to say, 5,000 people perhaps on the entire world, which is military analysts. And then military analysts who are really paying attention about neutral information, independent information. And therefore, the perception is entirely different. For me, it is no surprise, for example, or it was no surprise in March last year, in February, March last year, when the 41st Combined Arms Army fell apart while attempting to advance on Chernihiv, because its commander was corrupt, its deputy commander was corrupt, and so on and so on. The troops were poorly supplied, They had no fresh food, they had no water, they ran out of fuel after crossing the border and driving for 50 kilometers and so on and so on. All of this, and this ad hoc preparation of the entire invasion also, it's the same like in Syria. They arrived in Syria, then realized that we might need scent filters for our tanks and for our helicopters and for our aircraft. Nobody thought about this before in 2015. So, yes, there is a different gap in perception between the public and specialized analysts, so to say. But therefore, for the public is surprised that the Russians are losing this badly. People like me are not.
Tom, you have studied many different wars, particularly in the Middle East and other, and how this war in Ukraine similar to these wars, and what is the difference?
There are parallels. For example, when you consider the Rosguardia in Russia, which Putin has established as a paramilitary force to protect his regime, even from the threat of a possible coup within the armed forces, because just a few years before, he appointed a minister of defense, who then experienced immense problems while attempting to subject his ministry and general staff in particular to his control, and to curb the corruption, endemic corruption within the armed forces of Russia, and they were resisting him. And so Putin learned, okay, in worst case, I might face a mutiny or armed uprising from within the armed forces, and therefore I need my own armed force. And this is what Rosguardia became. That was one aim of this body. The other aim was, especially for case of such wars like now in Ukraine, because, for example, I'm convinced that Putin began planning this re-invasion already in 2015, 2017 at least, was also to have an occupation force for Ukraine, to establish a well-organized big occupation force in advance. And this Rosguardia is very similar by its function to the Pasdaran of Iran, to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, who were also established in order to protect the new regime that established itself in power in Tehran, in Iran, of 1979. That is one parallel. Then there would be another parallel. This is ironic, you know, everybody is supporting Ukraine, at least in the West nowadays, but everybody is ignoring Palestinians who are facing the same situation, just even worse, because they have been occupied in 1947-48, ethnically cleansed out of their country, and those who are still in the country or in this territory, however you want to name it, are occupied. They are held under military occupation. They're facing laws which are subjecting them to advantages, you know, of the Jewish population and so on. So you have a similar situation in Palestine, but nobody's talking about this, ironically. You have on the other side, and this is probably the reason why nobody is talking about Palestine issue right now. For decades, Arabs were major arms customers from from the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So you have a situation where much of the Arab world is siding with Putin and with Russia. We have a situation where in Syria, where Assad regime was saved by Putin, literally saved, and that this despite military intervention by Iran in favor of Assad, but this didn't work, so they called Russia for help. They are, of course, they're very thankful, and they are wholeheartedly supporting Putin. So there are parallels. They are not direct similarities, but there are parallels, you know. And you have a situation right now on the other side. This is also ironic. 1980, in September 1980, Iraq invaded Iran and attempted to take away at least a bigger part of the Khuzestan province. It's similar to what has happened to Ukraine in 2014. Russia invaded and took away Crimea and attempted to take away Donetsk and Luhansk. So there are similarities. It is not generally it's the same, but there are parallels between these conflicts.
Tom, you is a big expert in military aviation. Let's speak about that because and let's start from Russia, because we know that Russia have military aircraft and modern one. They have modern one. And how effective does Russia use this aviation?
Well, one of the things one can instantly conclude after studying the Soviet and then Russian military aviation industry, thinking about them, development, research, and so on, is that actually the Air Force is the entire concept behind its aircraft and the way it operates, it's entirely different than in the West. In the West, ever since the World War II, we have this idea that the air power can win wars on its own. The air power is first deployed to destroy the enemy air power, then to destroy the enemy air defenses, then to destroy the enemy ground forces. And whoever rules the skies rules the battle on the ground. This is the essence of what we are taught in the West. And we have seen this demonstrated in 1999 against Serbia, where the NATO ran this, 78 days long campaign and defeated Serbia by using air power alone. Of course, there was plenty of diplomatic pressure in the background, but essentially the war was fought by air power only, at least from the NATO point of view. And Serbian air power was destroyed, and they couldn't defend themselves, even in their terrain. In Russia, there is no such thinking. For decades, the Russians were explaining, oh, we could do the same, like you did in Kosovo. But it turned out, no, they can't. And they can't because they're not even thinking that way. They consider the Air Force something like extended range artillery, and that's it. It's not going beyond that point. They do appreciate having cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles are not even operated by the Air Force. Cruise missiles are, but just by bombers. And it turned out that their stocks of cruise missiles are too low. So they now have a major problem with finding a replacement for them and striking into the depth of Ukraine. And it turned out the tactical aircraft, which were so much advertised over the last 20, 30 years, particularly the last 10 years, the tactical aircraft are simply not up to the task. Why not? Theoretically, they could be equipped with super weapons and do fantastic things if used by some Western Air Force, but the training of their crews is not permitting this, because the training of these crews is still the same, more or less the same like at the times of the Soviet Union, which means conservative and self-preservance oriented, which means they are looking to avoid losses, whatever kind of losses, whether during training in peacetime or in combat. And they are not risk averse in combat, on the contrary, but because of obsolescence of their support equipment on their aircraft, they're suffering heavy losses even to weapons which of their own design. And therefore this Air Force is limited in what is it doing to supporting ground troops. It means they're bombing, for example, targets 20, 30 kilometers behind the front line, not any deeper. At the start of the war, at the start of this invasion of last year, they have attempted to strike such targets and have suffered a number of losses to Ukrainian air defenses, and then said, okay, now let's limit our activity over the battlefield to launching precision-guided ammunition from standoff ranges, or to this entirely pointless actually strikes with unguided rockets, which are fired de facto over the shoulder. They climb, shoot the missiles from 2 or 3 kilometers away, turn away before reaching the front line in order to avoid getting shot down. And then the missiles fly ballistically, out of, let's say, 128 they have fired, perhaps 2 or 3 actually hit somewhere around the target. That's all. So this is what is making the difference, and this is what is the role of this Air Force. And under such circumstances, it doesn't matter what kind of super modern aircraft Russia has and how much fuel and how much spares Russia has for them. It has neither taken care to train them nor to support them the way they could be theoretically deployed. And this is why its performance is underwhelming and inefficient. They have big aircraft, they have lots of fuel on this aircraft, like Sukhoi 30, Sukhoi 34, 35. And they are powerful aircraft. They can carry lots of weapons, but they're unable to deploy them to the fullest of their ability.
And what about the Ukraine, Tom? You say that who rules the sky rules the ground. How critical this military aircraft is for Ukrainian offensive, and is it really, critical?
When discussing the Ukrainian air power, one has to go at least back to 2014, if not even earlier. You had from 1991, 1992 until 2014, you had a situation almost over 20 years where Ukraine was actually still struggling with its post-Soviet future, so to say. what way, which way to go. Shall we become a presidency or parliamentary republic and so on. And amid all of this struggle, nobody was caring about armed forces. And correspondingly, the Air Force was in decay and deteriorating every year. It ended in 2014, I think, with perhaps, if it was as many, 100 combat aircraft. And these 100 combat aircraft were all still of Soviet origin, poorly trained crews, no flying time per year, and so on and so on. Now, in 2014, you had to scramble and to defend yourself. But the problem was there was still not enough money. And then there was a crucial mistake on both sides, Ukrainian governments and the West. The West was still celebrating its party, which it is celebrating since 1989. Now everything is fine. We have won the Cold War. We are dominating the world, and everything is great. We have cheap energy from Russia or United States from their own sources. And let's have fun. And in Ukraine, you had nobody who could properly explain to the West just what kind of threat is over there in the East. The successive governments didn't understand just how important and how little the West meanwhile understands Putin and his way of seeing things and understanding things. And this was a big failure on both sides. Because had, for example, in 2014, the West imposed really serious sanctions against Putin and rearmed Ukraine, seriously rearmed Ukraine, not just, helped a little bit, train 20 soldiers over there and 50 over there, or do some exercise with the Air Force, then we could have, provided a serious deterrence against this invasion of the last year. But this didn't happen. And so amid all of this, what happened with the Ukrainian Air Force? Nothing. It just, was limited to overhauling old aircraft left from the 1980s, 1990s, and operating, 60 MiG-29s and 30 Su-25s and so on. So nothing happened simply with the Ukrainian Air Force. Just painted new, fresh color on its aircraft, essentially. Of course, in detail, a few things changed here and there was a little bit more flying and exercise with the United States Air Force and so on. But in grand total, nothing changed. And this in turn meant that Ukrainian Air Force, as of February last year, found itself facing, overwhelming power. Because if the Russians are really effective, Russian armed forces are really effective in any kind, in any discipline, military discipline, then the air defense, at least against such a small air force like Ukrainian. And that in turn meant whenever a Ukrainian pilot is heading, into attack on Russian ground forces, he's facing absolutely impossible odds. In this regards, I can only say, all respect for your pilots, because if I'm to ask, they have something like 70 to 80% chance of getting shot down during every single mission they're flying. As soon as they're within 200 kilometers of the front line, which is almost every single mission they're flying, there is 70 to 80% chance for them to get shot down. And they have suffered also terrible losses in the last 12 months. So, but they couldn't do anything because the aircraft they're operating are obsolete, the avionics they have got is obsolete, or at least not sufficient to counter these powerful Russian air defenses. And that is the problem. This is not going to change anytime soon. And to make something sure, and this is what is making me a little bit mad sometimes, there is no way to change this by supplying Ukraine with, say, 20, 24, 30, 40, 50, even with 100 F-16 or Tornado or Eurofighter or something else, because there would not be enough. Because the Russian air defenses are so dense over the front line. And there are so many of them, and they are ranging, from simple soldiers who are operating manpad systems from their shoulder to this S-400 air defense system, which is protecting, which could theoretically engage almost any kind of target in a circle of 200 kilometers around themselves. So there is no way, even for 100 combat aircraft, to overpower this. For this kind of operations, the Americans have, just for example, F-22 B-1, B-2 bombers, F-35 stealth fighter. They are never going to deliver this to Ukraine. Forget it. In best case, Americans are going to deliver 30, 40 years old F-16s, and Europeans 30, 40 years old Tornadoes and similar stuff, which is, again, not that much better in comparison to what Ukraine is currently operating. So there are actually two solutions, which are much cheaper and much easier to apply. One is reinforced Ukrainian artillery. Why? Because modern artillery, as we have seen, and this is including HIMARS systems, this is including multiple rocket launch systems and so on, can range out to 70 out to 150 kilometers. You shoot the missiles or the rockets for flying, you pack and drive away, and nobody can hit you in return. Nothing happens. The Russians are claiming HIMARS, I think they have claimed something like 200% of HIMARS destroyed in comparison to what the Americans have really delivered. Over 30 of them they have claimed over 30 of them destroyed, while Americans actually delivered perhaps 20, just for example. So nothing is happening to you, but you are still hitting that target. So can be done in this way as well. And then you have Caesar systems, you have this Swedish Bofors systems, and so on and so on. All of them can operate much more economically and cause even more damage than the air power. And as sad as I am for Ukrainian pilots, I know that they would like to have something modern, something new, something better than their MiGs and Sukhois. It is not going to be of particular use. An F-16, even if it's donated by the United States to Ukraine, still costs in terms of maintenance, still costs in terms of fuel, still costs in terms of training the crew, and still costs a lot of money in terms of ammunition and spare parts. And it still needs a safe base to take off and to land. Artillery, as we have seen, Ukrainian artillery is doing miracles every single day. So this is one solution. Another solution is to increase the number of UAVs that are supplied to Ukraine. There are dozens and dozens of different types of UAVs, from small quadcopters or even smaller ones, to big machines and to combat machines, to really military-grade UAVs. This is what Ukraine needs. Ukraine needs a capability to strike at the Russians without getting hit in return. This is why systems like HIMARS are so good. You can shoot and shoot and shoot and hit the Russians, and you really hurt them. 1,000 casualties here, 600 there, 300 there, and so on. This is going all the time. And in return, I don't know about a single Ukrainian HIMARS operator being even injured. This is the way to win the war. You cause the casualties to the other side. You let the other stupid die for his country and not you. Because when that happens, when the Russians stop causing heavy casualties to Ukraine, only then are they going to start realizing, okay, we can't win this war. This is what is necessary in order to win this war. Break their will to fight.
Another important aspect is combined capabilities. Which side has advantage on these aspects today?
Right now, none, because you have no combination. Actually, as I said, the air power is not working. Neither the Russian or the Ukrainian air power is working. So you don't have a combination of capabilities. So what is there? Well, let me take a step back again. The Russians have lost so many tanks and so much armor that they do not even try to operate in mechanized formations anymore. They are operating in infantry and artillery. And Ukrainians who are preparing for 8 years, to face this Russian massive mechanized onslaught, and who were highly efficient in destroying that onslaught during the first 3-4 months of the war, are now facing a big problem because they are not prepared or not as well equipped, not as well trained to face an infantry onslaught. But there are no combined arms operations in sense of, for example, amphibious landing from the Black Sea, and then air power, and then ground forces. There is nothing of that kind on either side. So combined capabilities is really, limited to infantry and artillery, or tanks and artillery, and so on. And this is, as soon as there are 3 tanks appearing anywhere on the same spot of this battlefield, from Dnipro all the way to the Russian border, all the artillery is shooting at them. So they have no chance of survival, which in turn is the reason why I'm criticizing all the Western pledges and promises and so on, and deliveries of Leopard tanks and M1 tanks and Challenger tanks to Ukraine. It's pointless, because as long as one is not making sure that the Ukrainian artillery necessary to support them on the battlefield is going to overpower the Russian artillery in order to keep these tanks safe from the Russian artillery, nothing is going to change. The most we are going to see will be Challengers, M1s, and Leopard tanks destroyed by the Russian artillery.
Tom, today Russia tried to start new offensive. Someone says that it will be big offensive. Others say that Russia is no longer capable for large offensive. What do you think? And what is your understanding of situation, and what Russia's army is still capable of?
In my opinion, Russia is running this big offensive already since 24th or 25th of January. So that means already the third week. The problem they have is this long reach of the Ukrainian artillery, HIMARS and multiple rocket launcher systems. They have a reach of 70 kilometers, approximately, from the front line, behind the front line. This in turn means that the Russians cannot bring their supply depots closer to the front line than 70 kilometers. They have tried to do so. What has happened? Ukrainians have systematically found one after the other and destroyed all of them. So this means when Gerasimov plans an offensive, he has to plan, okay, I have a railway coming down to Bakhmut, but the last, let's say, 70 kilometers of that railway are not useful. And the entire logistical system of the Russian armed forces is based on railways. So this means, okay, I have to position my supply depots about 70 kilometers from the front line. Then I have to truck everything to the front line, to drive everything, to transport everything by truck. That means the entire operation is limited by the number of trucks I have in this. I can put on the roads in that sector of the front line. And as it happens, most of the offensives are not undertaken where there are the best roads and there are the best railways. So there is then a problem. He cannot concentrate enough supplies, and therefore cannot concentrate enough troops on one spot, on just one spot. So what he did instead is to distribute his supplies and his forces on 3 different areas. Smaller number of supply depots, small number of forces on 3 different, along 3 different parts of the front line. One is in Kremina, one is in Bakhmut, and one in Vuhledar. And this is what is going on since 24th or 25th of January. First, there was this ongoing battle in Bakhmut already. Then there was this attack in Vuhledar, and then came this attack in Kremina. And in all 3 cases, it turned out that the supplies concentrated or piled, literally, in support of this operation were too little, that the troops these supplies could sustain were too little, and that the efficiency of the Russian artillery during the winter is non-existing. He couldn't concentrate enough supplies and therefore not enough troops in one area in order to breach the Ukrainian front line. And because of that, this big offensive, I'm really sarcastically always calling it big offensive, is going nowhere. And he's going to continue that way, nevertheless. Gerasimov is going to continue attacking. Why? on one side, because politically Russia has no other option but to continue the war. On the other side, because the Russian armed forces actually do not know what is true defense. They do not defend in classical way. They're defending through counterattacks. They are following the motto, well, attack is the best defense. So which means they are constantly counterattacking. And that is their defense. And if they do not have the troops in that sector of the front line, only then do they stop and entrench themselves. But otherwise, they are attacking all the time. And this is what we are monitoring actually the last 3 weeks. One attack after the other, one attack after the other. And in some areas, it's working for different reasons, including terrain, including the Ukrainian command system, including problems with what is the name, Spacelink, and so on and so on. Starlink, sorry. And but in other cases, it's not working at all. We have seen this in Vuhledar, and we are actually witnessing this also in the Crimea area, where they are attacking already for more, at least 7, if not 10 days now. And well, they have reached Dvorichne again. Sorry, but yeah. I mean, I'm laughing about this, but you know, I'm sorry for people who get killed in the process, especially Ukrainians. But it is just, you know, when you are studying Soviet and then Russian armed forces for decades, what they are doing now, this is just a circus, really, a comedy first class, nothing else, a slapstick movie, you know. I mean, their military is so poorly trained that even most basic training of their tank crews is not working. You can see them driving over their other soldiers. You can see them firing a main gun while repaying the trees and so on. This is never going to work, you know. And everybody knows that. Even they know it's not going to work, but they still get mobilized. They still say, okay, we are Russians, let's go there and let's, you know, follow the orders and think afterwards and ask questions afterwards and so on.
Tom, you say that, nevertheless, Gerasimov continued to attack. Yeah. Do you think that this war will be long war? And what scenario do you see is possible in the next months?
Well, as you know, I'm not making any kind of predictions, but I can assess on the basis of what we know right now, and especially of such statements like Putin's in this speech, was it yesterday or the day before, that essentially this speech was, oh, excuse me, dear Russians, I screwed up. Excuse me for expression. It's really like that. I messed up. But I'm now going to increase your wages. I'm going to take care of the soldiers. They are going to have more leave, and so on and so on. This is all excuses, actually, from his point of view. Nothing else, just excuses, one after the other. So you have a situation where he's not withdrawing from Ukraine. He's not going to say, oh, no, we are going to stop this war and withdraw from Ukraine. And Medvedev even went for the record, I think it was yesterday, to say if we stop this special military operation, Russia is going to fall apart or something in this direction. So this is, you know, admission of utmost failure, but now we have no other solution but to continue the war. And this also means the war is going to go on as long as they have enough troops to keep on attacking. And this is why Ukraine needs plenty of firepower in terms of artillery, but especially ammunition, and then heavy infantry weapons like mortars, like automatic grenade launchers, and even more ammunition for this. Because nowadays, Ukrainian troops are foremost facing Russian infantry attacks, assaults in small groups, and they need weapons against this. You cannot overshoot with artillery on sparrows, literally. You need lighter weapons for this, but these weapons also have to be automatized and heavy enough to kill not just one soldier for every shell, but several of them. So you need heavy infantry weapons. That's why mortars and why automatic grenade launchers are so important. This is what Ukraine needs right now. And it's not coming forward. The NATO is not delivering. Instead, we are discussing, or the NATO is discussing jet fighters and tanks and so on and so on. It is not a solution. It is, you know, Western politicians searching for excuses. I've done something. I've sent them 5 M113 or something else. Yeah, fine for evacuation of Ukrainian wounded, but not helping in terms of winning the war.
Tom, do you think that lone war could destabilize a whole region and war could spread for the nearest country? Do you think that it could be in plans of Putin or something like that?
Well, the war has already destabilized the entire region. You have constant unrest in Moldova. The only thing preventing some sort of bigger unrest in Moldova is that there seems to be some sort of consensus between the Moldovan government and the regime in Transnistria, kind of, you know, we are earning well from cooperating with each other, so let's keep it that way, you know, nobody cares. So they are keeping the population in check and everything is fine. But otherwise, Putin would be happy if there would be some unrest or even a coup against the democratic government of Moldova. He would be happy if he could foment unrest in Georgia, and he might even come to such ideas like merging South Ossetia and Abkhazia into the Russian Federation and so on and so on. So he's all the time trying to destabilize because this is playing into his cards. And I don't know how much I'm managing to follow, but there are Russian or Wagner mercenaries active in Mali, in Central African Republic, in Syria anyway, cooperating with Hezbollah, you know, cooperating with Maduro's government in Venezuela and so on and so on. He's definitely trying to destabilize the situation, not only in the area, but out of Europe as well. Because this is in his interest. This is helping him keep himself in power, because he can all the time claim, oh, look, I am the great strategist to the Russians. And without me, you're all lost. There will be unrest and civil war in Russia and so on. But I'm the great strategist. I'm making Russia to a superpower again, and Russia to Tokyo, and Russia to, you know, Los Angeles if necessary. Excuse me for expression, but you know, it's really like that. This is what keeps him in power. On the other side, when one checks, you know, what kind of managers of top Russian enterprises have all died of under sudden circumstances, unexpected circumstances, and so on, you see what is going on. It's clear that he's cleaning in the background, you know, cleaning the deck and making himself safe. Whoever is potential candidate for becoming, you know, kind of a threat for him, head shorter or whatever else, or fell out of the window or down the stairs and then out of the window. Happens everything in Russia of our days. The war is going to go on. I'm afraid well beyond this year and well beyond next year, and Putin is going to continue destabilizing at every opportunity. We have to count on this and be ready for that.
Tom, thank you very much. Thank you to be today with us.
You're most welcome, and thank you also for your invitation to an interview.
Thank you. Tom Kupер was our guest today, and stay with us. Thank you.